Hi and welcome to Rosebread Homestead. Today is the day where we begin the process of making our artisan bread. We'll be making 2 loaves, and we're going to be starting with the wild yeast culture that we developed over a 5-day period, and we captured that on our video entitled Capturing Wild Yeast for Baking Bread. So this is the same start that I put in my freezer at the end of that video, and it has been out on my countertop here for about a half an hour warming up. So we'll be right back to begin the process. One of the things that I really like about making artisan bread is that this is exactly the way people have made bread for years and years, thousands of years, long before grocery store yeast was ever available. So it's kind of a fun feeling going back to basics and doing things the way our ancestors did things. So I'm going to go through the process with you and introduce you to some of the equipment. The book that I just love, and one that I introduced in the last video by Ken Forkish, is the one that I follow. And I use his procedures, I use his amounts, flour proportions for baking the various types of bread. We're going to be doing a very simple one this time. And so the process is this. Today, which is day 1, and it's in the afternoon, it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I just got home from work. We will feed our levain and then put a lid on it and leave it overnight. Boom, we're done. That's all we need to do today. Then tomorrow, we'll get up, or I'll get up. You can get up whenever you want to, but I'll get up early, and we will feed the levain again. And this is the second feeding of the levain. Now, it's important for those of us that keep these cultures of levain, and the word that I am saying is Levain, and it is French for leaven, and that is what Ken Forkish calls it in his book. Some people refer to all wild yeast starts as sourdough starts. And that's a little bit of a misnomer because all of them are not sour. This one is not sour. It has a little bit of a tang to it, but it is really quite mild, and actually it's very, very lovely. So those of us who keep these starts, we're not professional bakers, most of us, and so we don't keep it out on our countertop the way they do in a professional bakery, because they use it all day long making more and more loaves of bread. Rather, we store it in the refrigerator. And I store mine for up to a month at a time between uses. If I go beyond a month, then I will feed it to keep this culture pure. Now, that's the thing about making this artisan bread, is that we want to keep our culture pure. So these first 2 times that we feed it, both today and then first thing in the morning, we're going to be using the same consistent recipe that I use every single time when I feed my levain. I don't put anything extra in it other than 2 types of flour and water, period. That's it. That way this stays pristine and it continues the taste that I want it to have. And that's how you maintain culture year after year for years and years and years. I've had mine now for, I imagine, 4 or 5 years. That's when I started this one. So that the second day, we'll start by feeding the levain. It's a 13-hour time frame. We start in the morning by feeding the levain for the second time, and then we have 8 hours where we just leave it on the countertop and let it double in size. And of course, during that 8 hours, Jim and I might go ride our 4-wheelers if the weather cooperates, or we can do laundry or clean house or tend to children, whatever your household requires you to do. You can even leave the house and go shopping. Then after about 8 hours, we come back, and then there is the last 5-hour block, making a total of 13 hours for tomorrow, when this dough will be processing. And for that last 5 hours, at the first part of that 5-hour period, we begin the final dough. And then we will add the levain to that final dough, and we will reserve, we won't add all of it, we will reserve a piece of that and put it back in our refrigerator to preserve our culture. Then for the first couple of hours of that 5-hour time block, we will be working with the dough. It has to be folded in a particular way, and I will demonstrate how to do that. And then we will let it probably about double, maybe a little bit more in size. And then by the end of that 5-hour period, we will be shaping it, and we'll put it in the refrigerator overnight in order to proof. And then on the morning of the third day, we bake it, and that's all there is to it. So really, all of the time that we personally will stay involved with the dough is probably 30, 40 minutes max involved with the dough. Next, I'm going to introduce you to the equipment. Now, the 3 pieces of equipment that we used in capturing the wild yeast and cultivating it were this 6-quart bucket, and this bucket is the one that we will always use for mixing and feeding our levain. Now, this is the grandfather bucket. This one is a 12-quart bucket. This is the plastic bucket that we will be using to actually mix the final dough. And we'll do all of our folding and all of our manipulation of the dough in this 12-quart bucket. Now, as I explained in the previous video, I didn't buy this equipment at first. I had enough equipment in my kitchen that I felt like I could just start without it. And I made, several batches of artisan bread, and they turned out okay. But then I realized that, oh my goodness, I really need to try this equipment, and it's not very expensive at all, and I got it all through Amazon. Then the other thing that we'll use are these proofing baskets. And I had never worked with proofing baskets like these before, and I absolutely love these. They make the prettiest bread, and you'll see how we work with these by the end of the day tomorrow. When we are shaping our loaves, we'll put them in these baskets to proof, and then we'll put them in the refrigerator. Then on baking day, we'll heat our oven to 475 degrees, and that's when we will then bring the baskets out of the refrigerator, and we'll take that dough. It will have proofed overnight and be nice and bulky, ready for baking. And then we're preheating these Dutch ovens in the oven so that they heat up for 45 minutes. And then we'll just drop those loaves right down in the Dutch ovens, put the lid on, and then bake them for the prescribed time. Now, the reason that we do this is so that the steam, professional ovens have steam injections within the oven so that they inject steam during the cooking process. And that is what helps make professional bread so fabulous, with that nice crusty crust. And this is how we achieve that in our own ovens. So I have 2 of these. They both go in the oven at the same time, and I'll be demonstrating how to do that. So I'm now going to stop talking, and we'll get on with the action. So with the levain, I need the levain bucket here. We start with 200 grams of the levain. Now, you may remember that when I was dealing with this at the end of the video showing everyone how to begin a culture like this, I got this all wet. And then I got my hands wet as well, and I put it in a bucket of water. I'm going to be doing the same thing. The reason that we get our hands wet and that we coat the levain with water is because it is so sticky, and this way we won't have it stick to our hands. And so I'm going to turn the scale on. The scale I introduced to you last time, along with the thermometer for measuring the water temperature, and we're going to be doing that in just a moment too. So we're going to start with 200 grams of levain. Now, because this has been sitting out on my counter, it is all sticky again. When you get ready to do this, what you will want to do is take it out of your refrigerator and then immediately measure it and put it into your bucket and let it warm up inside your bucket for about an hour. So I've had mine out here in the plastic bag because I wanted to show you how to pull it out and then get it ready for putting in your bucket. So we want only 200 grams. Now it's not sticking to my hands. That's 189. And that's 203. That's close enough. So I'm going to rinse this off now. And I'm going to reach in here and pick it up, let it drip because I don't want to transfer very much water. And it's not a lot, and it goes right into the bottom of our bucket. Now I need to rinse this water, empty the water and rinse the bucket because I now need to use it for flour. So I'll need to dry this off. And as I said a moment ago, I use the same proportion of flour, the two different kinds of flour, every single time I feed my levain. And so this is considered to be a feeding. Okay. No matter how hard I try to get the inside of this completely dry, I already know that we're going to have some flour that will stick in here. Okay, now I'm going to zero it out so that now whatever goes in the basket will measure just the contents of the basket. And I need 100 grams of wheat, and this is the same recipe that we used in the previous video. So it's 100 grams of wheat. That's 97, 99.9, that will do. So we're just going to dump that right in. And then I use King Arthur's unbleached all-purpose flour, and we need 400 grams of this white flour. That's almost 200. 367. 390. 399.6, that's close enough, so I won't overshoot it, as I have been oft times want to do. Okay, so we'll dump this in. We're now finished with the scale and the flour. And so, oh no, we're not finished with the scale. I need to put 400 grams of water in at 85 degrees. All right, now we need 400 grams, zeroing this again. To double check that. Yeah, good enough. .3. Okay, that can go off. And now we do the mixing. And so remember, I have that lump of levain here in the bottom that I want to mix in and incorporate with this flour and water. So I'm squishing and squashing and mashing, moving the flour all around. The beauty of these buckets is that it really contains the dough. The dough can't get away from you in a larger, as it can in a larger bowl. It's just right there. And it has no choice but to be obedient. So we're mixing this all up. We want the flour and water to be all incorporated and the levain to be completely and thoroughly mixed in. So we have really on the dough only spent about 5 minutes so far. And overnight, this will double in size. And then probably around 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little bit earlier, we will discard all but 100 grams, and then we will feed it again. And on this second feeding, this is the one that we want to take our next start from. So not only will that second feeding produce the levain that we will be using in our final recipe, but it will also be producing for us the continuation of our start. So I'm going to rinse my hands here and get this sticky levain off. This is such a rewarding process. I learned to bake bread as a child. My mother instructed us how to do that, my sisters and me as well. And this is now ready. It's just going to sit right out here for 24 hours. But I did want to share this with you. So I have been baking bread for a long time. And when my own children were small, and I had a busy household with 6 children, and when my baby went to kindergarten is when I went back to teaching elementary school. And so our household was busy all the time. And so I got my routine perfected so that I could do that bread from start to finish in 3 hours, a batch of bread. And the bread was great. The family loved it, the kids loved it, and I was very satisfied with that bread for years and years. Then a few years ago, I got interested in wild yeast, reading all about it and how it's used in artisan bread and how this is the ancient way of making bread. And as I began to try it, my whole attitude toward bread and the taste of bread has changed. Previously, I had always used grocery store yeast, and now with using this wild yeast, it produces a very different flavor for the bread, and it is so worth the time spent in doing artisan bread. The reason that it is different is because the yeast has a long time to ferment. And so by using that long period of time for the yeast to slowly grow, those flavors develop in a way that are very different when you are using the speedy, fast-acting yeast that we get in the grocery store. Honestly, my life for years has been so rush. It is nice to just slow down and take some time to let this yeast develop. The flavor is it is earthy, it is like it's deep, and I can just tell you that this bread is absolutely the best bread I have ever made in my life. And it is versatile as well, because you can use that lump of levain, and by the time you are ready to do it in your final batch, you can add whatever combination of whatever flour. Sometimes I will mix a little bit of rye in, not with the levain. I always just save that when it is pure, and I don't mess with that at all. But when I'm mixing up the final batch, I will add rye flour or different proportions of wheat and white. And it is so much fun to just experiment and come up with different ways of doing this artisan bread. So we will let this sit out overnight, and we will be back in the morning with the next step. See you then. So we're back on day 2, and our levain overnight has risen. It is it's almost up to the 2-quart line in front, but the dough was a little bit slanted. In the back, it is very much up to the 2 quarts. So I hope you can see all these lovely bubbles. It looks just great. And so now the process is we're going to feed it again. This will take about 5 minutes. So as I have mentioned before, I have pre-weighed this bucket. I know that it is 415 grams. So I am going to remove all of the levain except for 100 grams, and we're going to feed it again. So I'm going to dampen my hands so that the levain will not stick to me. And I'm going to get a bunch of it out first because I know I'm going to take out almost all of it. Okay, now I'm going to turn the scale on. So because the empty weight is 415, I need for it to be 515 when we're finished. Oh, did it wrong. Now. And it's quite a bit over. Oh, I'm going to get my hands wet again. So it is 619. I need to remove about 100. That's 523, 518, and that will do. So that's what 100 grams look like. It's not very much at all. It is plenty to create the levain that we will use for our final mix. So we're going to feed it with our same recipe, and that is 100 grams of wheat. Boy, I'm almost out of wheat. Zero it out. I'll have to grind some more wheat before we start our final mix here. $102, that's fine. Okay, next we do 400 grams of white. $337, almost there. $399.4, we'll take it. And last of all, we will do our water, 400 grams at 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, there we go. So 400 grams. $400.3, pretty darn good. Okay, so there we go. And then we'll do the usual mixing. You've seen me do this before. And we want to incorporate as much as we can from the edges. And then as soon as this is done, we can go play for 8 hours, or at least until the time that it takes for it to double. Sometimes it's a full 8 hours, sometimes it's done in about 6 hours, so we want it to be just double again. And then we'll be in business for starting the final dough. And we'll start that final dough in our big bucket and do a little bit of pre-mixing before we add in the levain. Okay, so this is feeling pretty good. All right, I'm trying to spread it out just a little bit, get it more even this time so that the dough won't be slanted and rise higher on the back than it does on the front. Okay, so this was a very short clip. We'll see you back. We're going to go play, and we'll see you back after this becomes double again. We are back. I had a little glitch with the camera this morning, and I thought I was recording about a 5-minute segment, and it turned out my memory was full, so I had to delete some things and free up some memory, and that whole clip was missed. So the first thing I want to explain to you is what I did during that clip so that you can get caught up. First of all, our levain is way up to double, and so it looks beautiful, and we'll use that in just a minute. But I set that aside for that other little clip, and we started our final dough. Now the final dough was mixed in this tub, and let me give you the ingredients for this final dough. It was 740 grams of white flour, 60 grams of wheat flour, 620 grams of water at between 90 and 95 degrees, and that's all. This is the final dough, and then we let it rest for 30 minutes. So that's all that was missed on the other video. It has now rested for 30 minutes, and we are ready to do the next step. Now for the next step, I'm going to put this little tiny bowl on the scale and turn it on. I need to add 21 grams of salt, and I use fine sea salt for this, so 21 grams is not very much, and so I'm just going to pour right into this bowl until we get it up to 21 grams. This fine sea salt has just a little bit of a different texture. Then what we need to do is we sprinkle this evenly over the top of the dough. And that's important that it goes evenly over the dough. Now, because all of the rising time has taken longer than I anticipated, I am going to add just a few grains of yeast. And this is just regular baker's yeast. I'm going to add 2 grams. Now, when I was teaching students about the metric system and wanting to give them a comparison to standard measurement so they could sort of get the idea about how much a gram was, I told them to compare a gram to 1 raisin. So essentially we're going to be using about 2 raisins worth of yeast right here. And all this will do is give the crumb a little bit of a lift. The taste will still be produced exactly by the levain. Now, 2 grams of yeast is just a little dab. If I were making my regular recipe before I learned how to do artisan bread, I would have used 2 tablespoons of yeast for this same amount of dough. So we're now done with the scale and the salt. Actually, we're not done with the scale. We are for a minute though. I'm going to now sprinkle this little dab of yeast over the top of the dough as well. Now, a moment ago, I said that it gave the crumb a little bit of a lift. Now, bread has a crust, which is the outer part, and then the crumb is the inner part. And according to Ken Forkish, whose book I use, and I've cited him many times, he trained in Paris, and what he said was many of the fine bakers in Paris also use just a little dab of baker's yeast to give their bread that little lift, and so I'm going to do that. But with the levain, you can either do it with a little bit of yeast or completely without. It's an entirely different taste. So now that the yeast and the salt are over the top of the dough, we are now going to add our levain. Now notice that I've kept this pure. I haven't added anything to it. So we are going to need 360 grams of levain. So as I usually do, I am filling this bucket with a little bit of water, and we will measure out the levain. I'm zeroing out the scale, and I'm going to get my hands wet so I can handle the levain better. Zero it again, it wasn't cooperating there. Okay, 360 grams. Oh, and I wish you could really smell the top of this and look at it. It looks just perfect. And this is what we strive for when we are working with levain. So I'm going to get about 360. This is probably a little bit too much. Well, not too much. Get my hands wet again. It was sticking to my fingers. Just a pinch back. Okay, now I'm going to put this in here, letting a lot of it drip. I want to grab that little piece. We don't want to carry much water, and I'm just going to drop it right on the top. Now, for the rest of this levain, this is where we are now going to take our start. So I have a plastic bag right here ready. I'm going to, once again, I want at least 300 grams in here. Zero it out. And I'm going to coat it with water so that it will not stick to the plastic. And I'm going to see how much is left. I don't think it's 300 grams, but if it's close, I may take a second start. You know, it's 273 grams. I am going to just take a second start just to have a backup. I have learned that freezing this levain is not the best thing in the world to do. So now I have two starts. Getting the air out of the bags. And I'm going to get my crock, which I set aside. This is actually a King Arthur's flour crock that I got for the levain, and I'm going to put both of these in here. So I put those back in the refrigerator. Now setting these things aside, we are finished with all ingredients to this flour, or to this bread now. I'm putting the yeast back in its plastic bag and setting it aside as well. From now on, we are just going to be working with this dough. And so I'm going to show you a procedure that is called folding. And what happens here is, remember, we have the salt and the yeast scattered on the top, and the levain is now this lump on the top. So I'm going to reach under this dough and bring it up over the top, and then I'm going to rotate the bucket. And then I'm going to bring the bottom up over the top and mash it in, rotate the bucket. And so I'm going to do that all the way around several times, coming underneath the dough and then pushing it in. This is called folding. Now, what this is doing is this is combining the yeast and the salt into the bread, and it is also combining the levain into the bread. And this folding process develops the gluten, which we need to have all developed. So those little pockets will be in place for the yeast to produce its gas and cause the bread to rise. Okay, now I've done enough folding. The next thing I'm going to do, this dough is now kind of all in this big lump. I'm going to pinch it to where it looks like a caterpillar jointed all the way down. And then I'm going to fold it again. Now I can still feel, as I am doing this, some of the grains of the salt and of the yeast. And now I'm going to pinch it again, turn it into a little caterpillar. It's starting to stick to my hand, so I'm going to dampen my hand again And now I'm going to fold it while turning the bucket and pinch. And fold. And pinch. And this is be the last fold. It's feeling like it's all self-contained now. And I'm going to now turn the dough. It's sticky, but I'm going to now turn it upside down. And here it is. So what is going to happen over the next 2 hours of this 5-hour segment is that I'm going to come hour and I am going to do the folding one more time. Each time I'll do the folding, and that's developing the gluten. So we'll fold it 4 times. Well, actually this was the first time, so we'll do it 3 more times. And I may not bring you back each time, but I do want you to know that the dough begins to change consistency. The feel to it is a little bit different. And so as we progress through this next stage, I'll bring you back anytime there are some changes. And then in about 4.5 hours, we will be doing the shaping of the bread and getting it into the refrigerator where it will proof overnight. So I will see you in just a little while. So we are back for just a few minutes. This is the first folding since we set our dough in the first place, and I wanted to show you what happens. You may have noticed that when we left it, it was kind of up in a nice ball, but look how much it is relaxed. It is now spread out across the entire bucket. So very quickly now, we're going to do a few folds, getting my hand wet to work with this dough, and we reach all the way underneath and bring it up over the top, and turn the bucket, bring it up over the top, and we just go around about 3 times. Keep doing the same thing, reaching way under the dough and pulling it up over the top. That pulling up over the top gives you an idea of how elastic the dough is. We're developing the gluten. Before we are done with all of these foldings, when we leave it in a ball shape at the end of a folding, it will become more rigid and keep its shape. But do you see how it's turning into a ball now again? So we just keep going, grabbing underneath, pulling it up over the top, putting some tension on that dough. And that's all there is to it. And we're going to flop it over. Now, notice how it is. Sort of smooth on the top. And now it's up in a ball. And I'll bring you back again next time so that you can see how much it has relaxed. See you then. This is our 3rd folding. I don't know if you can see this, but the dough has not come all the way to the edge over here or over here. And so it is starting to mound up, keep its mounded ball type shape. Okay, so we're going to do a few quick folds. Reaching under, over the top, push, and fold, and fold. This really develops the gluten. It's important that you put some tension, and by tension I mean pulling it and then attaching it to the top, and that kind of holds everything together. I can feel that the dough is getting more resistant to my folding, which is a good thing. That's telling us that the gluten is being developed, which is good, good, good. And there are quite large air bubbles that are being formed, which is also good. Okay, that's all we need to do. So we'll turn it so it's smooth on the top. And we'll see how much it holds its shape now until our last fold. So I'll see you in a little bit. It has been about 5 hours. I did the last folding off camera and then left it for about 3 hours to rise. It is now 2.5 times bulk. And this is exactly the size that we will work with as we now are going to shape it. We're just on our second to the last leg. In the morning we'll bake it and we'll be finished. So now we're going to remove the bread dough from the bucket, and there is a particular way that we need to do this. First of all, I'm going to flour a little space down here, and I'm going to put just a little bit of a sprinkle on the dough itself. Now, we don't just dump this dough out. It's all gassy. We want to preserve that gas, and so I'm going to help lift it away from the edge of the pan. Can you see the threads there coming and all of the gas inside there? And so we're helping it out of the bucket, preserving as much of the fullness as we possibly can. All right, we're done with the grandpa bucket there. Now I'm going to do a little bit more sprinkling of flour. And my hands as well, so that I don't stick too much to it. And I'm going to make it into kind of as even a lump as I can. And we're going to divide this, hopefully equally, in two. So I have my dough cutter right here, and I'm going to just press down and cut that dough. And then I will carefully set one of these aside. I'll work with this one, and we do kind of a little bit of a folding. I'm going to fold this over here, and as I twist it and turn it, it's full of big bubbles now. You may hear some pop. See all these bubbles right here? So we are going to just do a little folding, and gradually, it becomes a nice ball. There's more popping of bubbles. All right, so this is about ready to put the tension on it, and I'll show you how we do that. Okay, I'm going to get my hands floured. And then I'm going to come over here to this section of the countertop that is not floured. And I'm going to turn it upside down. Now, what is going to happen here is that that raw dough against the naked counter is going to grab the dough. And so I'm going to just pull it forward, and as I do it, the bottom is being grabbed. And so it's putting tension across the top. So I'm going to pull it this way, and it's stretching. What happens is the underside comes up and stretches across the top. You might be able to see the flour separating on the top to see how the tension is being put on this round ball. And this is what a good shaped artisan bread boule, they're called, it looks like. Nice tension all across here from pulling it on that naked countertop. Now I have some bubbles. There's a bubble right here. I'm just going to take the sharp edge of here and pop a couple of bubbles. And do a couple of more stretches. It's stretching and pulling the dough. Okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of flour and I'm going to dust this basket. And I'm very carefully going to lift this up and put it right in the proofing basket. All right, one down, one to go. So again, we're going to help it over here. Grab a little more flour from my hands. And I'm going to do a little bit of gentle folding until it turns into a nice formed ball. Popping lots of bubbles. See this big bubble here? Look at that one. This is how we want our dough, nice and gassy. That means our levain is working perfectly. Little by little, it just turns into this nicest shaped ball. Now, we don't want flour on this side of it because it won't grab the countertop if there's flour there. So I'm going to turn it upside down and I'm going to pull it forward again. I'm going to do it right over here so you can maybe see this a little bit better. You can see the ridges of flour separating as I pull it forward because I'm putting a lot of tension across the top of that dough, and that helps it keep its shape. Nice and smooth on the top. Flour in the basket. And carefully lift and put this in the basket. Now, what we're going to do with these two baskets, I'm going to cover them with just some plastic grocery bags that have no holes. I've previously checked, there's no holes. And these are going to go in the refrigerator overnight. We are now finished with working with dough. So we have come almost full circle. These will go in the refrigerator, and then they will proof overnight in the refrigerator, and first thing in the morning we will bake them. And that little clip will probably be only about 5 minutes. I will show you how we put them in the oven and then how we take them out, and then we'll be finished. So thank you for sticking with us, and I'll see you in the morning. Good morning. Sleep still in my eye. It's about 10 to 8. And we are ready to put the bread in. We just brought it in from the refrigerator out in the garage. Now I wanted to show you a couple of pieces of equipment. First of all, I have these amazing mitts. They are good up to 500 degrees. Now we have been preheating the oven for 45 minutes at 475 degrees. Now in just a moment I'm going to open up the oven. It's very hot. I'm going to take the lid off one of the Dutch ovens, and then I will be dropping one of the loaves in, and I will put the lid back on, and then I'll do the same thing to the other. But let's take a look at the loaves of bread. They have been proofing now overnight. Look how beautiful they look. Now, you may see these little cracks on the top. There's nothing to worry about because when I put these in the oven, this side goes down on the bottom of the pan. And so we essentially turn them upside down. Now, I may have to have my back to the camera when I do this. I've got to be safe, and Jim makes sure that I'm safe. So we'll do the best we can, getting the best angles that we can. So first thing I'm going to do is get the bread out of the way. I don't want to be reaching across the hot lid when I get this bread. Okay, so I have one mitt on. I'm opening the oven. I'm standing aside so the heat doesn't get me, and I'm going to take one lid off. Taking off the mitt. Now, back here over to the bread. I'm going to be turning the bread upside down in my hand. And you can see how beautiful this is. And I'm just going to very carefully put that in. And then with my mitt back on, I will put the lid back on this one, and now do the same for this one. Inverting the basket in my hand, letting it fall naturally into my hand. And again, you can see the little round things of flour on the top. Now I bend the loaf like this, it doesn't hurt it at all. Putting the lid back on. Now, we will have these cook for 30 minutes. I'm actually going to turn my oven down to 465. My oven runs just a little bit hot. I like to preheat it all the way up to 475, but I bake at 465. In Ken Forkish's book, he talks about liking to have the bread cooked to a burgundy color. That is one way that I differ from Ken. That burgundy color is too far burned for us, and so we like to have a lighter color bread. So we will bake this at 465 for 30 minutes. Then we'll come back and take the lid off and bake it for, take the lids off both of the Dutch ovens, and then we will let it cook for an additional 10 or 12 minutes until it gets just to the brown that we like. And so we will come back when we are ready to take them out of the oven, and that will be in about 40-45 minutes. All right, we're just about ready. My timer says we have about 1 minute left, so we're going to go ahead and take the bread out. First, I want you to notice these roses. Jim brought these home as a surprise today. He just does that for no reason all the time. So one of the reasons we're called Rose Red Homestead. All right, so I have my mitts on. The lids are over here. They've been off for just about 10 minutes. So I'm going to go over to the oven, and one by one I'm going to bring the bread and we'll turn it out right here. So here goes. First I'm going to turn the oven off. All right, so here's what it looks like in the pan. Notice the little tiny bit of very brown right here, the little burgundy here. Okay, so I'm going to shake it until it comes loose, and then turn it over right there. Put this in the sink. You can see the bottom. That's about as brown as we want our bread. So this is first loaf, and I'm getting the second. And again, we have just the little burgundy ridges here. I've never had one stick before. Wow. Okay. Bottom and the top. So two beautiful loaves of artisan bread, and the crust is very crusty, and on this bread we don't cut it while it's warm, and that's one of the disappointments for me, because I've always loved warm bread straight out of the oven. But if we open the bread up too soon, it is not good for the crust. Let me turn off my phone here. These cracks on the top, you'll notice that if you do a lot of cruising around the web, a lot of people who make artisan bread will score the tops so that they will split open like that. With this method, we don't have to, because what we have done is, as we folded those folds over and over, it is that folded surface that is now facing upward, because we inverted it to put in the oven. And so as it grows, it just, those folds open up. One of the things I love to hear, I don't know if you can hear it, is the bread. It's like snap, crackle, pop. Can you hear it? Sometimes I will just come and put my ear right up to these loaves of bread as they cool because they crackle. And the crust is just so crusty, and the crumb is soft and beautiful and nice, and the bubbles are sometimes a little bit uneven, but that's the beauty of bread, of this type of artisan bread. Thank you for sticking with us. This has been a long video. It's almost an hour. And even though the process may seem long and laborious, it really is not. Once you get the hang of it, it only takes about half an hour of working with the dough over the course of 3 days. Just a quick review. On the first day, we fed the levain, and that was all we did with the dough. And then the second day, the first thing in the morning, we fed the levain again, and then we let it come up to double. It took about 9 hours instead of 8 hours. And then we started our final mix in the last 5 hours and put the levain in with the final mix and kept out our portion to reserve our start. And then we folded it about 4 times and shaped it, and really that's all there is to it. So I hope this is useful to you. Please, if you have any questions, just enter them in the comments below. And if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to us so that you can find out when our next video will be released. Thanks so much for joining us. This is a long and productive video, and we will see you next time.